start with a few pointers on how you might want to things that you want to remember for your interviews, and also I would try and answer most of the questions that you might have in your mind. And towards the end of the session, we will take questions and try and get answers to those. At the end of the session, what you can expect is to remember some of the pointers that you will want to factor in during interviews to ace those ones. Can we move on to the slides, please?
Sharmita, why don't I do a brief introduction to yourself so that people get to know about your storied background as well. So, ladies and gents in the audience, Sharmita has over 20 years of experience and has led talent acquisition functions at companies like Dunzo, Zomato, Flipkart, and more. Sharmita has a deep understanding of the Indian startup ecosystem and has implemented various strategies to attract candidates to work in these high growth startups. So lots of learnings coming your way. Over to you, Sharmita.
Thank you so much. All right, we move on to the next slide then. Sure, I'll start with some of the etiquettes that you must remember while attending interviews. Point number one, be punctual, right? Now, most of us have interviews virtually these days. And so it's highly recommended that you kind of check your internet connection, be ready with pen, paper, maybe a glass of water, and probably join in about 5 to 10 minutes prior to the scheduled time, so that, you know, all the technical glitches and all of that are taken care of, right? So you don't spend time in terms of, am I visible? Am I audible? All those conversations, right? Next off, when you are slated to talk to somebody, you will be given the interviewer's name, right? So do spend some time to research on the interviewer's LinkedIn profile, Twitter handle, to get some context about who are you interviewing with. And it's also very important to know the name of the interviewer and, of course, how the name is pronounced, right? So, and when you start the interview, one of the things that we tend to miss out is to greet with a smile. That helps as a great icebreaker. There is a certain like comfort and, like a respect established already. So do smile during interviews. One thing that we tend to do during interviews is that, we tend to just jump to the answers, right? Because we think we know what the interviewer is asking. More often than not, we don't let the interviewers finish the questions. So do spend time, be patient, hear out what the interview really has got to talk before you kind of answer. Also, sometimes the interviewer can ask you open-ended questions, right? Like just leaving, open-ended answers and stuff like that. Do ask probing questions. We as interviewers, in my experience, we do check on and we kind of give a little brownie points to candidates who ask us follow-up questions to those questions, right? Because, that shows their curiosity, the problem-solving ability to really kind of probe, think through before answering. So that's an attribute that most interviewers appreciate. So hear the questions out before you jump to answer them. One of the important and one of the most obvious questions during interviews would be, why is it that you're looking for a change, right? So what happens is we tend to criticize our current employers, colleagues, or even, like, for example, when we talk about projects and stuff that we did way back in college, we tend to belittle at times our colleagues, batchmates, and stuff like that. Strictly no, okay? That's not appreciated. You must really review your answers, right? This is an obvious question, right? Why are you looking out? Or, what happened in that project or something like that. So never in your conversation ever should you actually criticize any of your colleagues. Could be your manager, could be your peers at college, could be your current employer. So just do take care of that. Yes, for sure, Snehal. I'll come to that. So when you kind of interview with any organization, do research on the company, right? So read up about the organization. There's a lot of resources available on the internet about media, the press releases, the LinkedIn posts and all of that. Spend about at least half an hour to research about the organization. And in your interview, when you're asked, like when the interviewer, while concluding the interview, would essentially ask you, do you have any questions for me? Do keep some of the questions prepared in advance, more so focusing on the organization that you're interviewing for. That's something that is again like really appreciated. Like it shows how much you have read up, how much time you have really spent, and why you are so much interested in the organization, right? Again, a very small tip: during interviews, we tend to like fumble, struggle a lot and stuff like that. Do keep a pen and notepad with you. It's very, very important, because and it also shows how interested you are for the interview. One word of caution: at the beginning of the interview, do ask the interviewer that, is it okay if I take notes during the discussion, right? Because that way you're also cautioning the interviewer in terms of sharing information that can be divulged externally. So always call out and ask, like, is it okay if I take notes during the interview? Also, at the end of the interview, the way you began with it, it's always important to end on a positive, enthusiastic note. You can be asked uncomfortable questions. You can be asked questions that you absolutely did not like during the interview. It's okay to be firm yet polite, but do not get on a negative note or anything. It's okay, like you may like the interviewer, you may like the organization, you may be turned off by a few questions that have been posed at you, but do not get into that zone at all. Control your emotions, if even if some of the uncomfortable questions are asked, and always try and close on a positive and enthusiastic note. Any questions so far? Okay, all right, we can move on to the next slide then. Yes. So this is not as much for like freshers as much as it's for the experienced folks. Of course, the freshers do get this questions asked as well about what is your expectation on a compensation, right? So when you're asked this question, please remember that it's okay to expect what you expect only if there is a rationale and you are able to explain as to why you deserve whatever you're expecting, right? To give you an example, you would have some information about what your peers get in the market, right? So do that research, right? Talk to your colleagues, talk to your circle, like at this role, at this kind of years of experience, what is the compensation that's trending in the market? You would get some data points. Also, when you're asked about CTC, right? I mean, this was the question that came up. CTC is a very broadly used term, okay? CTC is basically cost to company. It includes a lot, from your basic compensation, which you get, which you kind of either take home or gets deposited in the form of PF, or maybe gets deducted as tax and stuff like that, which is the compensation that comes to you. For a cost to company, there are other parameters. So when you talk to the interviewer, do not mention the term CTC. It's always good to say, like, this is what I expect as my fixed compensation, and this is what maybe as a variable or so. CTC is no longer used in the industry per se in terms of when you refer to compensation. Also, when you quote what you're expecting, like I said, it's absolutely okay, as long as you have a justification to explain why you deserve what you expect. So get the rationale straight there. You could also talk about things like, my compensation has not been corrected in this many years. This is what my peers get in the market. Things like, I'm due for an appraisal, and if I were to move, this is the kind of money that I'm looking for because I'm expecting a hike and all of that. So when you are very unreasonable in your compensation, please remember, sometimes, I mean, at least about 50% of the times, you're filtered out basis your wrong expectations in terms of compensation. So this is one thing that you should be extremely, extremely watchful about. Any questions? Is it okay to ask expected city in form of in hand directly? No, Deepak. I think you should always talk about in terms of what is your fixed compensation. When you talk about what you would get in hand is is a factor of how you have saved taxes, what are your instruments and all of that. So when you talk about in hand, maybe that's not the right approach, unless you're like a fresher, just started in your career and all of that. So other than that, it sounds very, if I may use the word, like childish in a way, like when you talk about, okay, this is what I want in hand. And so it's always good to call out what is it that you're looking for in a fixed and a variable component. You can also tell them that this is what my compensation should look like. I'm okay with, like a blend of fixed and variable, but this is what I'm looking at. When you're specific, it just helps set context. Does that answer your question, Deepak? Great. All right. Any other questions?
We have one question before that, Sharmita.
Yes. Is it okay to mention our current and expected compensation before the interview? For sure. So when you have the interview with the recruiter, it is always important to call out. And during your interviews, do be consistent on what you quote as your expectation. For example, if you quote a certain figure X to interviewer 1, and to interviewer 2, you quote X plus Y, you have already kind of broken that, because interviewer 1 and interviewer 2 are going to talk if you get through, and they're going to discuss compensation expectation. Now, if there is a mismatch in what you quoted to interviewer 1, which could be your recruiter, and interviewer 2, that something could also go against you. Anything else? Okay, we can move on then. Right. One question that came up for this was how to sound confident without expertise. First thing, don't, because it's going to go against you. It's always okay to be honest, right? Now, for example, that, this is a skill set the interviewer is asking, but you cannot demonstrate any past work on that skill set, right? Or on that application. Our recommendation to you would be to be always honest about what you have done and what you haven't done, right? However, it's always good to, pull out examples from your past to show your learnability, right? To show how fast you have learned, you have adapted to those skill sets in the past, maybe in projects in school, in college, or maybe in terms of your, organization and stuff like that. Like, look, while I didn't know that the skill set primarily, I got trained, and this is how I picked it up, and this is the impact that I created. Call out examples like that. But what happens is when you claim things that you have not done during the interviews, you might impress the interviewer, right? But what will happen as a consequence is once you're onboarded, there will be mutual mismatch in terms of expectations, right? You will be hired by the interviewer believing that you can do, and then when you come in and join and you're not really apt, or you're not really kind of, you have that past work of working on that skill set, you're setting yourself up for failure. It's going to lead into mutual mismatch of expectations, and hence it is always recommended to be honest during interviews and just call out what you have done, right? Any questions? We can move on to the next one then. Thank you. So how do you structure your portfolio? So Vivek and Monica has already kind of apprised you in terms of what are good to haves, must haves, and can do without. So when you structure your portfolio, right, it's always important to call out and highlight your skill sets, right? Do call out the tech stacks that you have used in the past. Recruiters, when they kind of screen resumes, while they're tech recruiters, most of them do not have an understanding of, like the skill sets and stuff like that that are absolutely needed and stuff like absolutely used, and what depth and breadth. So they would use keywords to search for resumes, right? So like Vivek mentioned about how ATS parses resumes. Similarly, recruiters also go through that. So do call out the tech stacks that you have used as keywords, because that kind of helps your chances of your resume being screened. Next is when you work on projects, right? Especially as a fresher, right? I mean, it is always important to call that out. One of the questions that I have seen asked in organizations like Flipkart, Dunzo, Zomato, where these organizations would hire a lot of freshers out of campuses, right? Now, one of the first questions that would be asked was, okay, you have studied, this is your grade going. What else have you done? Right? What are the other projects that you took up? So this could be, and not essentially is always your academic projects appreciated. So projects that you might have worked on in parallel with your friends, impacting society, impacting, like a problem that you were trying to solve. Those are things that are always given importance over your academic projects. So if you have done projects like that, do call out during the interviews, and also ensure that you mention that in your resume. Again, honestly. And another follow-up question to the projects that you would have done, in your, while in your college, or, as part of your academics, would be that what was your contribution to the project, right? Call that out, right? Like, for example, we would usually have 3-4 people on a project, right? So call out what has been your contribution. What problem did you all start solving for? And then talk as a team first, and talk about the I part of it, because that is important, right? Calling out what have you done, right? I mean, a project can be successful as a group, but when you kind of haven't contributed enough, that stands out too. So do call that out. Yeah. And during the interviews, like I would always harp on, honesty always helps. It's okay to call out the things that were fallouts. What have you learned from those failures? Failures are encouraged sometimes, because you would know that success doesn't teach you much. Firm believer that failures teaches you a lot. So calling out your failures on those projects, what did you learn from them? What hurdles did you really cross to make it a success, is something that interviewers would definitely be interested in. Okay, I don't see any questions. We can move on to the next slide then. Sure. Initially, when I started this conversation with you, I mentioned that before the interview, do spend some time researching a little on the interviewer, borderline stalking, if you will. So do read up their posts on LinkedIn, on Twitter, to really kind of understand what is the thought process of this interviewer. It helps. Because when you have common talking points, right, like a common connection that you might know, a common interest that you might have, sometimes that helps a lot in solving for those awkward silences, building that rapport, like building that credibility and connect. So encouraged to do that. Do look out for where have they worked before, interests, and yeah, so that is something that's highly encouraged. And more often than not, I can't stop harping on it enough that people tend to mispronounce names of interviewers. Do read up, do check with people if that's the correct pronunciation, if the name's too complicated. But during your conversations with the interviewer, when you mention that their name, right? I mean, it's a very psychological hack. We all know, right? I mean, when you use names during conversations, there is a natural connect. So that would be another tip that I would want you to remember. We can move on to the next one. Sure. Now, this is a little technical question relevant to all of you, which is how to crack the design round. Now, for this, the only piece of advice that we all have is read up. Okay. Now, it's important to understand and not memorize, because while you may memorize and just go ahead with the concepts and all of that, if you do not understand, you will not be able to answer follow-up questions. So that's something that we would like you to remember before you attend interviews. More often than not, what happens is when you have crossed that 2 to 3 years of experience threshold, right? As fresher, a lot of things would be fresh in your mind. But once you have crossed that 2 to 3 years of experience, thing. So you tend to forget, basics, some of the concepts and all of that. Do spend time to brush up on your computer concepts, right? Like read up about simple things, right? I mean, it's all important. Like, do focus on algorithms, do focus on design architecture, all of those Tannenbaums and all of that. Do read up a few pages, to skim through some of those pages to understand even concepts of networks and all of that, right? I mean, people do check on your fundamentals during interviews. So some of the questions, for example, when you read up on the internet, the possible questions relevant to front-end development and all of that, it's important to rehearse and self-assess those answers, right? We all want to win in our mind, right? So it's always important that you hear those answers yourself, assess whether that's something that would make sense. You would also want to get some of those answers reviewed by your mentors in the industry, your seniors, people that you look up to understand, do you think this is the right answer? Because that way you're all geared up and you know what interviewers really want to hear. Any questions on this particular aspect? Okay, we move on to the next one. Sure. Similarly, for performance related questions, again, like your computer science fundamentals have to be cleared, right? Again, understand, don't mug up. So doesn't help and stuff like that. Also read up, right? I mean, there are many resources available, right, on designing systems, architecture, all of that. Understand what it is, and then kind of, like I said, rehearse, reassess, and then kind of, you will sound so much prepped up, so much confident before you go for that interviews, right? So you would know, okay, this is what it is. Again, a word of caution, do not jump to the answers, listen to the questions and then kind of answer the questions, right? Don't be too jumpy during interviews. Okay, we move on to the next one then. All right. So this is one question that, we kind of,
just nudging them to ask more questions, Sharmita.
Sure. I was just reading that up. All right, cool. Now, one of the things that's, that happens a lot these days is that, okay, I'll come back to that, Chetan. So how do we sound confident if we don't know the answer to a question? One of the most common phrases that we all have seemed to forgotten is, I don't know. We don't use that as much. It's okay to say, I don't know, I have forgotten, or I can't seem to remember this at this point in time, right? Goes on to show how honest you are and how high you are on ownership, to show that, okay, fine, I don't know. But if you kind of brag, right, please remember the interviewer on the other side of the table has experience, a little more wisdom, and an ability to see through that fake confidence, right? It's okay to say, I don't know, I can't remember, or I can't seem to remember this at this point in time. Can we move on to the next question? Or allow me some time to think through this and I will answer. But do not sound confident, which is, just for the heck of it. It doesn't add up. All right, Chetan, any other question that you might have? All right, cool. Moving on. So how to manage when you have an offer at hand, right? Most of us, these days experience a lot of candidates who are either serving their notice period or they have multiple offers at hand and are just exploring this organization as just another opportunity, right? So I said this organization could be any organization, right? Including the startups that I have been a part of. Now, it's okay to interview even when you have an offer at hand, right? But it is important to explain why. Because, I would feel cheated as an interviewer if, and I may have, trust issue in terms of rolling out an offer, because if I sense that you're just shopping for an offer for the compensation bit of it. However, if you convince me as to why you are interested in the organization, what is the impact that you're absolutely looking to create, and why are you so excited about joining the organization, right, will actually kind of help me kind of be sold on making an offer to you, right? I mean, I would be keen then. If you tell me like I'm just exploring this opportunity, for compensation, the offer that I have is for X, I'm actually looking for X plus Y. So I would know that tomorrow, if I give you X plus Y, you would go somewhere else asking for X plus Y plus Z. So I don't want that. And hence I will hold back from making that conversation ahead or making an offer, right? But if you tell me like, you have read up about the organization, you know exactly why you're sitting across the table for an interview and not essentially to review your compensation as such, I, as an interviewer, would be very keen on, continuing the conversation and see if it's of mutual interest. Yeah. Abhishek, you asked me how to pitch interviewer if you're switching our domain, like from testing to front-end development. If he needs 2 years of experience, but we have only 6 months experience in front-end and 1.5, will it be a negative impact on our interview? No, not at all. So when you're switching your domain, right, it is also, see, let me break this into two parts. Is it okay? Is it going to have a negative interview on the impact on the interview? The answer is no. Okay, that's very straightforward. But it's also important how you're going to convince the interviewer with some examples from your past, right, that you might have demonstrated about learnability, about how you kind of adapt, right, how you have really changed things around, how you have problem solved for the interviewer to take interest in you. And while the interviewer may have had, a definition of the role when he set out to hire, that okay, the person needs 2 years of experience and all of that, but he will be willing to he or she will be willing to discount that job description that he had in mind if you are able to convince him during interviews with your learnability, with your skill, with your will to learn. So that's something that I would definitely recommend. But please understand, it's not wrong to try, and hence it will not have any negative impact on your interview. The outcome could be different. The interviewer may choose to hire you or may not choose to go ahead and make an offer. But however, it's completely up to you on how you really kind of take things around. I'll give you one personal example, okay? So this was way back before I joined Flipkart, okay? So I was in the United States of America for 4.5 years on a dependent visa. I was not allowed to legally work given the visa restrictions of the country. I was on a dependent visa. So all that I knew was about jharu, pocha and bartan, because that's what I was doing for 4.5 years. When I was interviewing with Flipkart, my manager asked me, what do you think about social recruiting? I was like, nothing. And then she asked me, what do you think about LinkedIn, as such? And this was way back in 2010 to 2012, and I was living in a cave, right? I mean, I was not in touch with the real world of recruiting. So I said, I didn't even know that LinkedIn sells as a product to organizations, because initially when LinkedIn started off, they were just collating all your connects and all of that. It was free and stuff like that. So I didn't even know that LinkedIn sold as a product. But I had promised to her that, like, I'm a fast learner with examples from my past work. And, to an extent that I got a lot of awards from LinkedIn for in-mail conversions. Like, I was one of India's first 3 LinkedIn certified recruiters. So when you talk about it's okay to accept what you know versus what you don't know and call out examples with learnability. The interviewers are usually impressed. Okay. Hey, good afternoon, Aman. How much should I ask for hike in front-end development role with experience of 1.5 years, current CTC 3.76 lakhs per annum? Great question. Again, Aman, so this is completely relative to the organization that you're applying for. Research. Do look up a lot of resources that's available on the internet, including Glassdoor. You would have some figures, some guardrails, some pointers as to what this particular organization that you're interviewing for provides as a compensation and stuff like that. Also, it is important to check with your peers as to what is it that they are getting for the similar work that they might be doing in other organizations, and that way you will get some pointers around that. A standard hike, a reasonable hike that you ask when you kind of switch organizations, that's a trend, is about 25%. Anything above and beyond that is considered a little unjustified, unless you have very strong rationale to back up that expectation with. All right, moving on. Should I stay a bit longer in MNC like TCS in 3 or for at least 2 years, or should I switch? I'm having 1.5 years of experience. To answer your question, Abhishek, I think tenure always matters, right? Jumpy people, not appreciated. And I'll give you the reason why. In a lot of startups, there's a lot of condensed learning, right? When you kind of are with an organization for 3 years, right, in a services organization versus a very high-paced, fast growth startups and stuff like that, the learning is very, very condensed, right? So tenure is always important, right? When you are, working in an organization for about 2 to 3 years, what are you really doing? You are adapting, right? Because the organization will go through changes. You are learning a lot. You have just started to contribute, because you're out of that 1.5 years that you just spoke about, the first 6 months would have been about learning, and you would have just started to contribute from your 6th month in the organization as a great performer, right? So 1.5 years is not good enough to really kind of contribute, learn, and move on. So my recommendation to you would be at least 2 to 3 years in any organization that you work with, to show your stability and to show that what you have really learned. Otherwise, like they say, a rolling stone gathers no moss. So it's always better to stay put for some time, so that when you move out, right, you can always justify, okay, this is how much I've spent, this is my usual loyalty, this is how I contribute, this is what I've learned. So and your learnings are something that every interviewer would be very, very interested in wherever you go, whichever job you apply for. Right, Abhishek? All right, good. How can I prepare a resume that meets the standard for remote jobs? ATS compliant resume, because all organizations have moved to ATS. ATS, whatever be it, right? I mean, you either apply through LinkedIn, careers page, a referral, or any other source, right? All goes through an ATS. So there are various sites on the internet. I won't name them, you can Google them. So they actually help you to check whether, your resumes are compliant for ATSs. Highly recommended to do that check before you, are job ready, for, you're trying to apply. Because sometimes what happens is, while you may put details and stuff like that in boxes and in, like parts that the ATS cannot really parse, so those information gets missed out. So do kind of vet your resumes on sites that kind of tell you whether your resume is ATS compliant. Again, short and precise. More is always, less is always more, right? You do not, when you kind of write paragraphs about the past, about your work and, your past and current work, it's always important to be very, very concise, to the point, use bullet points if needed, and be very, very concise, right? Nobody, like all of us, all of us in any competitive exam or whatever have always hated reading comprehension, I would believe, right? So nobody wants to read through paragraphs and all of that. So keep it concise for better comprehension, readability, and assimilation of information. Yeah. All right. Yes, grammatical errors, right? Yours. So things like that, yours, all of those, like little grammatical errors, just turn off a lot of interviewers. So do spell checks, right? There are again tools available in resources on the internet. Do check your CVs for grammar, and kind of like before you apply for jobs, okay? And in my personal experience, I have actually, as early as last week, for one of the candidates who interviewed for a job, like had not mentioned the tenure and all of that. I was like, can you just resend this CV before we have this interview again? Because, there are things that I would like to see in a resume. So if it's not there, it just gives me an impression maybe the job seeker isn't as serious as I am for the interview. And hence, I do not want to spend that much time, because it already has biased, the lack of interest in terms of spending time on your own CV is not appreciated. Okay. This is very important. The resume sync well within your LinkedIn profile. During interviews, and I'm telling you this from most interviews that I've seen, while interviewing, you will see a lot of common connects, right? People will ask you, who do you report into? Do you know this person and stuff like that? So please remember, in another tab, right, the interviewer is already checking your LinkedIn connections, whether you have really worked and stuff like that. If there are common connections that the interviewer finds with your tenure in a particular organization, the person may tend to do a ref check and all of that. So do ensure those are in sync. Yeah. Okay, Prashant, you have a question. Is it good to switch between similar tech stack, like a React developer switch to Angular? And is it considered better having multiple tech experience than specifically in one tech? Right. Great question. And I'll tell you how organizations really view this. So there are two things, right, Prashant? Tech breadth that you just spoke about, and then there is tech depth, right? Now, when I talk about like more of an individual contributor track, the IC track that you have in your career, right? When you are a developer, a senior developer, an architect, a principal architect, and a chief architect, versus a developer, a senior developer, an engineering manager, a director, a vice president, and then a CTO, right? The tracks are very, 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 very different. Now, as an individual contributor, it's always important to be a specialist, right? So that, there is more depth to your profile. But however, when you go through the people manager track, because you will be taking a lot of decisions basis the breadth of tech stack that you have. So you will be taking those decisions while architecting the blueprint of the, the entire system and stuff like that. You will be, choosing one stack over the other. the breadth becomes very, very important then. So it completely depends on you, on the role that you really kind of envision. If you were to go through the individual contributor track that I just told you about, the career path that I spoke to you about, which is maybe the architect, principal architect, chief architect path, it's always important to focus on tech depth. And if you were to go the people manager route, tech breadth will come in a lot more handy, because that way you will be able to judge, right, what works, what doesn't, which like for example, is React better or Angular for an organization? Is it like, if the code kind of like really kind of has to be clean and stuff like that, do I choose React, do I choose Angular, is it compatible with this, is it compatible with Z? So all of that will help you in terms of like taking those decisions. Hey Diksha, what are the special skills that should be included in resume that is going to apply in Goldman Sachs for internship? Right. Depends on the role that they're looking for. Absolutely, Diksha. I will not be able to be very specific about what GS looks for. But as any tech recruiter, I would be interested in understanding the projects that you might have worked on, the skill sets that you really know, right? The things that you might have adapted, problem solved for in those projects would be something that I would really want to know, even as an intern, because that way I know who am I getting in on the board, because an internship could also convert to a PP offer, right? So that's how it works. So call out, right, those achievements that you might have and stuff when you kind of present your resume. All right, we can move on there. Sure. Okay, are there sufficient opportunities abroad for front-end developers? Of course, yes, a lot. See, it's one of those most in-demand skill sets today, right? I mean, it's either full stack, it's almost rare to find, but as much as you need backend, you need front end, right? So it's a very in thing, it's in demand, and it's here to stay. Because most organizations, right, I mean, as a front-end developer, like I'm talking more about the B2C organizations, right, the consumer internet and all of that, would need your skill sets, and that's where the world is already going towards, right? So there are very few organizations who do not need front-end developers. Great skill to have, hone that, update yourself year on year, learn a new language and new skill to just keep you updated, because without updating, you're gonna, like nobody has that much importance if like there is not have been enough learning, in terms of updating and upgrading yourself, right? Also, like when I talk about opportunities abroad, at Talent 500 right now, like I know of opportunities at the UAE, the Eastern Europe, US always has a lack of front-end developers. So all markets, if you will, have this need. So yeah, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, hey Sharmita, I have a question for you. First off, how can go one pitch to overcome a gap of 2-3 years after graduation? Also, if one is likely to switch from a non-tech domain to tech and putting himself to learn basic required programming skills. Okay. 2 to 3 years after graduation is pardonable, if you will, if there is justification as to what you were really doing, right? For example, if you were preparing for something, if you really spend the time in upgrading yourself, great. But if you spend that time WhatsApping and Instagramming, not appreciated, right? So it's always important to really have that, conviction and reasoning on a gap, because, like while for a lot of, like women in the industry, women in technology, people understand, right? I mean, you have commitments towards family and stuff like that. You take a break and stuff, all of it. But, once you graduate, right? I mean, you really have to have that drive, that passion to really either upgrade yourself or look for a job. So that's what would be something that would be appreciated. Also, if one is likely to switch from a non-tech domain to tech and putting himself to learn basic required programming skills. There are a lot of organizations, right? I mean, and a lot of resources available and stuff like that. It's totally up to you in terms of what you really want to do, right? I mean, I could be suggesting courses, but if you don't find your true calling, it's not going to be of any help. So think through, spend some time, have those conversations with yourself as to where you want to see yourself, right? I mean, what is it that you really want? What is it that will make you truly happy? What will it really make you like, what is it that you really aspire to do? And then follow that track accordingly. Trust me, when you're happy and when you're driven about something that you would excite you, you perform that much better, you learn so much faster, you impact that much more. Okay, are full stack developer roles front end heavy or back end heavy? They are usually back end heavy, Nikhil, in my experience. Like in terms of when we look for full stack, ideally we would look for somebody who can do about maybe a 60-40 kind of split, 50-50 with a lesser probability, but more often than not, it's usually back end heavy in my experience. Yeah. All right, we can move on then. Okay, how to avoid stuttering during interviews. I was so glad, I can tell you, when I saw this question, like somebody has actually thought through this. Again, I will kind of tell you, kind of to take pointers from whatever Monica and Vivek discussed earlier this morning about how your profile should ideally look, what are the contents of it that would really make an impact and all of that. And keep that ready as a reckoner. Read through your resume. I mean, you should know the facts that you've put in, right? So keep that ready before the interview. Read up and, kind of refer to that if you fumble for any reason. Again, when you kind of answer and stuff like that, be sure to be consistent about your answers. This will only come through practice. If you have either kind of reassessed your answers and whatever, right, you will be that much confident during the interviews. So rewind, replay those answers in your mind, and before you go for an interview. Some questions will be completely out of syllabus, and that's okay, but for the most that are those possible questions, you should keep your answers ready. All right. Be consistent about your answers, right from your compensation ask to your reason for change, to the tech stacks that you worked on, to the projects and stuff like that. Because please understand, interviewer 1, interviewer 2, interviewer 3, 4, they all talk amongst themselves. So consistency is the key. All right. Being reasonable, okay, being humble is very important. It's okay to show confidence, but it's overconfidence is a no-no, right? It's okay to be humble when you are given a compliment or something like, one of the candidates actually told me, yeah, tell me something, and I didn't know. I was like, okay, we are not having this conversation anymore. So humility always helps, right? It's okay to be ambitious, but people like that, staying grounded, staying humble, saying, I don't know, I may not know this, give me some time to think through this and stuff like that. Those show that you're a real human being, right? I mean, you are not somebody who's trying to oversell and all of that. And it's much more acceptable that way. Okay. So that was the last question that wanted to talk to about. So if there are no other questions, we can end this session.
Thank you so much for that, Sharmita. Guys, I think we have another 5 minutes, 6 minutes. So please feel free to type in any questions that you have.
Sure. I will take that question, Chetan. So describe yourself. How exactly do I answer this differently from my resume and stuff like that? Begin by, a little bit, you need to remember that anything to do with your family background is completely personal and private. Okay, you may be ask those questions during those interviews, but do not really, you don't have to volunteer that information already. You know, I've got 3 sisters, 4 brothers, and all of that. Nobody wants to know any of that. Talk about where have you been brought up, right? Where did you go to school? When I see talk about school, about the college that you might have gone to, what all have you learned along the way, right? And then a very don't spend more than 3 minutes talking about where you have been brought up, where did you do your schooling through, where you are today, right? Again, rehearse the content, right? That script should be ready in your mind, right? I mean, you should be able to talk about, during those 3 minutes about, the learnings that you might have, you know, like, and things like, what did you really look forward to in the next organization and stuff like that, during those 3 minutes of introduction. If you go on in a 1-hour interview with about 5 to 10 minutes describing yourself, like, that's too much to handle. No, nobody wants to know so much. So just be concise, precise, and again, write down, right? Take notes about what you really wish to talk about in terms of your achievements, in terms of your learning, in terms of what really shaped you up today. And then scribble out those lines that you think will not probably make an impact, right? Again, talk to your mentors, talk to people around, and see if that script really makes sense to them. Yeah, and that will make you more and more interview ready. How to justify your switch early when the work is not as per as your expectation. Honesty always helps, right, Nikhil? So when you call out the reasons for your conviction, because if you are convinced, you can help others being convinced, right? So be convinced that that is the true reason, because people will do a ref check, people will talk, and people will figure out. So if you are able to kind of substantiate that with examples, with what, and be very demotional about it, if you will, would mean that you're not emotional about the entire episode, you're not accusing anybody whatsoever and stuff like that, and you're being extremely objective. That would really help, versus like call out what is it in the most objective way, Nikhil, during such questions. All right, I missed Prashant's question, which is, while having interviews at starting, I use less English to give answer to introduction and basic question, but when I have to explain something and I feel difficult in explaining, I start explaining in common language. Does that considered as bad part? Of course, yes. As much as you want to use a language that you're comfortable in during interviews, what tends to happen though is that English is our official language of communication, right? So you may not be able to, for example, I'm just giving a very example that's on top of my head. For example, if you use Hindi during an interview, right? And you're talking to somebody in the South who may not be as comfortable in Hindi or may not really know that, right? So it just kind of, it gets to a very uncomfortable situation. Break it down, use small sentences. Don't use, you don't have to make complicated sentences to explain what you're trying to say, but break it down into small sentences and talk to them, but don't use any other language. Some companies prefer one-page resumes. So how many pages of resumes is ideal? I won't like a resume that's beyond two pages at max, and that too at great levels of experience and all of that. 1 page is good enough, right? Like I said, be very precise and concise. Use bullet points. Talk about the tech stacks that you have used. Smaller fonts also sometimes help to really kind of shrink your resume to a pager. But that would be my recommendation in terms of the ideal length of resumes. Like if you are a fresher and if you give me 3 years of experience, 3 pages of resume with what percentage you scored in your 10th, 12th and stuff like that, Like with engineering, first semester may I got this, second semester may I got that, doesn't interest me. So keep it very, very concise. It is important to understand who's your audience, right? Because you want to grasp that attention. Precision and accuracy and brevity always kind of helps. Would be tough to find any new opportunity with dream companies if having gap of 2 to 3 years in between college days and working with any organization for 5 years. Would be tough to find any new opportunity with dream companies if having gap of 2 3 years in between college days and working with any organization for 5 years in this new trend. No, not really, Deepak. Not really. People have medical exigencies. People have reasons as to why they drop off for 2 to 3 years in between, right? I mean, however, it is important to explain that gap. You can't be like I said, you can't be chilling and Netflixing and all of that. So highly not recommended. But if you have a gap that's explainable, it's all good. Why do interviewers ask so many questions to freshers who is just unfamiliar to those questions? Later getting a job, that person gonna browse the code whenever he or she lacks, which means it's worthless to have some skills during an interview. Sapna, please understand the competition is that much, in the outside world. So yes, you will be posed with questions pertaining to your fundamentals, pertaining to understand whether you have really studied what you were assigned to study, and also kind of how much have you really, really kind of assimilated over the years. So very important, but that's how the world is, Sapna. So you're fighting with that many freshers in the market, right? So, and everybody wants the best. So yeah, I understand it may be a little unfair, but that's how it is. Yeah. So read up and kind of, again, just brush up your concepts all the time, right? And never memorize. How many projects should be mentioned? The projects that are of impact, Prashant, that have really kind of, don't talk about, very small ones, the irrelevant ones or the not so high impactful ones, but talk about the projects that where you have created a difference, the projects that you are very proud of, right? Those are the ones that you should mention. Vaibhav, while applying to top product, companies, should we put more focus on DSA or front end skills more important? Okay, what is DSA, by the way, Vaibhav? I don't know what you mean. I'll come back to you if you could ping me that. Acha, data structures, yeah. While I'm applying at top product companies, should we focus more on DSA or is front-end skills more important? So there are two things here. For every front-end developer or back-end developer interviews or full stack interviews, some of the rounds of discussions are absolutely, absolutely unavoidable. One of them being your algorithms and data structures. One of them being your design and architecture. The third being your problem solving skills and coding skills, right? So when we take in people, right, be it the the most high growth startup, fast paced environment, or even a services organization, people will evaluate you on this, right? And because it's an all-rounder that we really want. And that is why it's always important when your parents would tell you study, when your teachers would be like, focus on this subject, there was a reason to it. This will all come in handy all your life. Okay. Is it okay to use sir, ma'am during interviews? Depends. Some people would correct you to use, their first names and all of that. Go by those instructions. Mamta, it's about the fundamentals again, right? It's completely about the fundamentals because again, like during interviews, that's something that's usually checked though. Should we ask our feedback at the end of the interview or is it indecent to ask it? I wouldn't appreciate. I really would not appreciate if anybody asked me that question. While it's a practice in the West and people are more forgiving, if you will, during interviews for those questions, in my experience, interviews are usually turned off because while you're talking, right, the interviewer is in a way judging you. And, so those questions are not appreciated. Yeah. As an experienced candidate, can I mention my company's project in which I'm working on in my project section in resume, or will it be information breach? If you have signed an NDA and you're not allowed to talk about it, do not talk about it. Do not write about it in the resume. But when you discuss, do call out about that. While I have not mentioned the details in my resume for the non-disclosure agreement that I might have signed, but this is what I really contribute to. While like it's always advised to stick to those protocols of being of not disclosing what is not encouraged. What skills are required if I want to be a freelance developer? Again, Prashant, find your true calling. Figure out what really interests you and follow that path. Because while I could advise you, it could be completely different from what you really wish to do. Have those conversations with yourself. Talk to your mentors, talk to your seniors, talk to people that you absolutely look up to and are experts in the field to give you some advice. So that would be my recommendation.